A romance audiobook. By Forever Always, Accidentally Married. No, please, Elara whispered, but the old Ford gave a final wheezing sigh and died. Silence. She was stranded, right in front of Phoenix Corp. Today of all days. The Grant interview inside was her only shot at making rent. Mr. Henderson, her landlord, wasn't known for his patience. In fact, he was probably already composing a passive-aggressive text message. Her phone buzzed. Chloe. Rent dollars due by 5. Henderson called again. Scary face emoji. Of course, he did. Elara sagged against the steering wheel. This wasn't just bad luck. It was a cosmic joke with her as the punchline. Her reflection in the rearview mirror showed a woman on the edge. Flyaway hair, a smudge of something under her eye, and a dress that screamed, "Trying too hard." Still, what choice did she have? She needed this, not just for the money, but for a tiny sliver of hope that her acting dreams weren't completely dead. Taking a deep breath that did little to calm the hummingbird doing a tap dance in her chest, she pushed open the groaning car door. Showtime, she thought with a grimace. One foot in front of the other. That's how you walk into potential disaster, right? The lobby's cold air felt like a judgment. Elara Vance? A voice like polished steel cut through her anxiety. She turned to see a man, tall and impeccably dressed, emerging from an office. His eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over her, and Elara felt a blush creep up her neck. This had to be Mr. Moneybags himself. "Kael Blackwood," he said, his tone leaving no room for pleasantries. He didn't offer a hand. "There seems to be a miscommunication. There is no Phoenix Initiative grant in the way you imagine." Elara's stomach dropped. Miscommunication? But the email... "My HR department occasionally uses creative descriptions for unique recruitment needs," Kael stated, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes as he glanced at her again. An error. Recruitment. This day just kept getting better. "So, no grant?" He gestured curtly. "Come in." His office was vast, with a view that could make eagles jealous. Elara felt small, like a lost kitten in a lion's den. And then he said it. "My associate for a family function tonight has become unavailable. Food poisoning." He paused, his gaze direct. "I require a companion. My aunt's birthday. It's non-negotiable for me." Elara blinked. "A companion? You mean, like a date?" He gave a sharp nod. "Precisely. 5,000 for your time, tonight only." $5,000. The words hung in the air, shimmering. Rent, groceries, maybe even a down payment on not being a pedestrian. But the way he'd looked at her, the cool dismissal in his eyes, it felt like he was buying a slightly damaged accessory. Was her pride worth 5,000? Her empty wallet screamed, "Yes, you fool!" The offer, $5,000, was a lifeline she couldn't ignore, even if it came with a hefty dose of humiliation. Kael Blackwood watched her, his face unreadable, probably expecting her to either burst into grateful tears or grovel. Instead, a tiny, wicked idea sparked in Elara's mind. He wanted a presentable companion? Oh, she'd give him a companion, all right. Just maybe not the one he was expecting. She was an actress, after all. "That's quite an offer, Mr. Blackwood," Elara said, her voice surprisingly steady. The desperation was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but now it had company, a simmering indignation. "I have a few conditions," she added, enjoying the slight arch of his eyebrow. "Conditions?" he repeated, a hint of something, surprise, amusement, in his tone. "Yes, money up front. Cash," she said, needing the tangible proof. "And you'll treat me with respect, not like, well, you know." He almost smiled. Almost. "The money is arranged. Respect, Miss Vance, is generally earned." The barb stung, but it also firmed her resolve. Challenge accepted. "All right, Mr. Blackwood," Elara said, extending her hand with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "You've got yourself a date." His handshake was brief, cool and impersonal. Yet for a split second a strange little zing like unexpected static jumped between them. She pulled her hand back, perhaps a little too quickly. He didn't seem to notice. "My driver will be downstairs in 30 minutes. Be ready," he said, already turning away, the deal done in his mind. Elara clutched her purse, the thought of the cash a guilty comfort. 30 minutes. Enough time to mentally prepare for the performance of a lifetime. This was going to be interesting. The limousine was another world. Plush leather, silent efficiency, and Kael Blackwood opposite her, engrossed in a tablet that probably cost more than her last year's earnings. The envelope of cash in her bag felt like a small bomb. "All right," Kael said, his voice finally breaking the expensive silence, though his eyes remained glued to the screen. "The ground rules." Oh, this should be rich, Elara thought, arranging her features into an expression of polite interest. "We've been dating for 4 months," he began, his tone flat. "Met through mutual friends. We enjoy art galleries, obscure films. You find my work ethic admirable, if occasionally frustrating." Elara had to physically stop herself from snorting. Admirable? She'd rather admire a particularly interesting damp patch on a wall. "And," he continued, "for tonight we are on the verge of a breakup." Elara blinked. "A breakup? Why make it complicated?" He finally looked up, his gaze intense. "It manages expectations, particularly my Aunt Maeve's. She's a romantic. If she thinks we're too perfect, she'll start planning the wedding. This way, any awkwardness is attributed to our impending split. Aunt Maeve. So there was a specific person this whole charade was for. Interesting. That explained why he was willing to shell out so much. You are also, Kael added, his gaze flicking over her again with that infuriatingly casual assessment, slightly intimidated by my family's wealth, but trying to be brave. Your background is modest. Aspiring artist will do. The condescension, subtle but definitely there, made Elara's teeth clench. Modest? Intimidated? Oh, you just wait. Got it, she chirped, a little too brightly. Dating 4 months, love art, about to dump you, suitably cowed by your rich family. Anything else? He gave a curt nod, already looking back at his tablet. Just stick to the script, Miss Vance. Elara stared out the window as the city blurred past. A script? He had no idea. She was an actress, and she was about to improvise the hell out of this role. This evening wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about payback. The grand family estate wasn't just big. It was practically a principality. As Kael's ridiculously fancy car crunched up the long, winding driveway, Elara felt a fresh wave of, "What have I gotten myself into?" He shot her a sideways glance, his jaw tight. "Remember the rules, Vance, especially the about to break up part. Keep it subdued." Subdued? Where was the fun in that? And then they were stepping out into a flurry of greetings. Kael plastered on a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Elara, on the other hand, decided to lean into her role as the slightly out-of-her-depth, modest girlfriend. A woman with kind eyes and silver hair swept into an elegant chignon rushed towards them. "Kaelin, darling, and this must be Elara." Her voice was warm, like honey. This had to be Aunt Maeve. Before Kael could launch into any pre-approved narrative, Elara gave a little, almost clumsy curtsy. "It's so lovely to meet you, Mrs. Blackwood. I mean, Maeve, Kael talks about you all the time." That last bit was a lie, of course. Kael mostly talked about stock prices and the importance of punctuality. Kael looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. But then Aunt Maeve chuckled, a delightful tinkling sound. "Oh, a charmer. And so pretty. Kaelin, she's wonderful." She squeezed Elara's hand. More family members appeared, a sophisticated-looking bunch who all seemed to possess the same air of quiet wealth as Kael. Yet Elara, instead of being intimidated as per Kael's script, found herself enjoying the performance. She accidentally bumped into a priceless-looking vase, catching it just in time with a theatrical gasp, complimented a truly hideous abstract painting with wide-eyed sincerity, "It just speaks to my soul," and laughed a little too loudly at an elderly uncle's dry joke. With every unrefined move, Kael's expression grew more pained. Strangely enough, the family seemed captivated, especially Aunt Maeve. She hung on Elara's every word, her eyes sparkling. "You're a breath of fresh air, dear," she whispered to Elara during a brief lull, patting her arm. "Kaelin can be so serious sometimes." Elara glanced at Kael, who was currently engaged in a stiff conversation with a man who looked like his older, even more serious brother. He caught her eye and gave a minute, almost imperceptible shake of his head. A warning. She just smiled sweetly. Oh, this was just the appetizer. The main course was yet to come. "So, Elara," a cousin with an inquisitive glint in her eye asked later, as they all gathered in a drawing room that looked like it belonged in a museum, "how did you two actually meet? Kael is so private about his personal life." All eyes turned to Elara. Kael froze, a teacup halfway to his lips. This was her moment. "Oh, it's quite the story," Elara began, clasping her hands together with feigned nostalgia. "Isn't it, darling?" she cooed, nudging a mortified Kael. He coughed. "Yes, well, we met at this incredibly avant-garde experimental theater festival," Elara announced, her voice full of dramatic flair. "I was performing a rather intense piece of interpretive dance, expressing the angst of modern existence through movement." Several family members nodded politely, looking utterly bewildered. Kael looked like he was mentally calculating the fastest escape route. "And Kael," she continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "was in the audience. Apparently he'd had a tad too much complimentary kombucha at the artist's reception earlier." "Elara," Kael hissed, his voice a low warning. "He was so moved by my performance," she bulldozed on, beaming at the captivated family, "that he leaped onto the stage, mid-performance, declaring I was a revelation." She paused for effect. "He might have been a little tipsy, trying to join in the interpretive dance. It was beautifully chaotic, a true meeting of souls amidst the mayhem." A ripple of delighted laughter went through the room. Aunt Maeve was positively beaming, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "Oh, Kaelin, that's so wonderfully impulsive, so romantic." Kael's face was a study in controlled fury, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He looked like he wanted the plush, antique carpet to swallow him whole. He shot Elara a look that could curdle milk. "Yes," Elara said, patting his hand with a saccharine smile. "He's just full of surprises, my Kael." His hand was rigid under hers. "Full of them," he muttered, his smile looking more like a pained grimace. The family, however, seemed to find his discomfort endearing, a sign of his bashful love. Elara mentally gave herself a standing ovation. This was better than any stage role she'd ever had. And the best part? She was getting paid for it. The atmosphere in the grand dining room was warm, almost festive, largely thanks to Elara's fabricated tales and Aunt Maeve's infectious delight. Kael, however, sat beside Elara like a man on death row, occasionally shooting her glances that promised swift and painful retribution. Elara simply basked in it. Aunt Maeve raised her champagne flute. "A toast," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "To my dear nephew Kaelin, and to Elara, who has brought such unexpected joy into our lives, and clearly into his." Everyone murmured agreement, glasses clinking. Kael managed a tight smile. Elara felt a sudden, mischievous impulse, a reckless surge of theatricality. The almost breaking up storyline Kael had so carefully constructed. It was about to get a major rewrite. This was too good an opportunity to pass up. After all, what was one more little white lie in the grand scheme of things, especially when it could make Kael Blackwood squirm so deliciously? As the toast ended, Elara stood up, her heart thumping a little faster with a mixture of nerves and audacious glee. Actually, Aunt Maeve, everyone, she began, her voice ringing with carefully practiced emotion. There's something Kael and I have been wanting to share. Kael froze beside her, his head snapping towards her. His eyes widened in dawning horror. Elara, no, he breathed, so low only she could hear. She ignored him, her gaze sweeping across the expectant faces of the Blackwood clan. Kaelin has been so wonderfully persuasive, she said, placing a hand dramatically on her chest. And after such a whirlwind romance, well... She paused, letting the suspense build, savoring the look of utter panic on Kael's face. We're getting married, she announced, her voice bright and triumphant. For a second, there was stunned silence. Then the room erupted. Cheers, applause, delighted gasps. Aunt Maeve looked like she was about to faint from happiness, tears streaming down her face. Kael stared at Elara, his face pale, his eyes blazing with a mixture of disbelief and fury. He looked utterly, completely, and wonderfully trapped. Elara just smiled, a picture of blushing, engaged bliss. Checkmate, Mr. CEO. The moment they had a sliver of privacy, as the family buzzed about caterers and venues, Kael grabbed Elara's arm, his fingers like steel bands. "Are you insane?" he whisper-yelled, his face a mask of cold fury. "Married? What in the absolute hell were you thinking?" Elara tried to wrench her arm free. "Lighten up, Kael. It's just a little extension of the performance." They loved it. Loved it. He looked apoplectic. "This isn't a game, Elara. You've just announced our engagement to my entire family. How do you propose we get out of this one?" Before Elara could offer a suitably flippant response, Aunt Maeve approached them, her face alight with a joy so profound it was almost painful to watch. "Oh, my dears," she exclaimed, clasping both their hands. I am overwhelmed with happiness for you both." Her eyes, bright with unshed tears, fixed on Kael. "Kaelin, darling, you have no idea. This is everything I've ever wished for you." Kael's anger seemed to deflate slightly in the face of his aunt's sheer, unadulterated joy. Then Aunt Maeve's smile faltered, just a little. She swayed, and Kael instinctively reached out to steady her. "Aunt Maeve, are you all right?" She waved a dismissive hand, but her face was suddenly pale, her breath a little shallow. "Just a little tired, dear. All this excitement." She looked from Kael to Elara, her gaze impossibly tender. "You see," she said, her voice dropping, becoming fragile. "My doctors, they haven't given me the best news lately. Nothing to worry your heads about now, of course. Not on such a happy day." She squeezed their hands tighter. "But to know you're settled, Kaelin, to see you happy and loved, it's my greatest wish, truly. Perhaps my last one that truly matters." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Kael stared at his aunt, his expression shifting from anger to a deep, wrenching conflict. Elara watched them, the triumphant smirk wiped clean from her face. This wasn't funny anymore. The dying wish card was a powerful one, and Aunt Maeve, whether intentionally or not, had just played it perfectly. Kael looked at Elara, his eyes filled with a trapped, desperate anguish. He didn't say a word, but the message was clear. They were stuck. Truly stuck. His aunt's happiness, her fragile health, her heartfelt plea, it had just slammed the door on any easy escape from Elara's impulsive announcement. He was bound by a lie, and now, so was she, in a way she hadn't anticipated. The instant Kael managed to pull Elara into a secluded alcove, away from the jubilant family, his fury erupted. "An engagement, Elara? Are you certifiably insane?" His voice was a low, dangerous hiss, his eyes blazing like chips of ice on fire. "This was supposed to be one evening, one, not a lifetime commitment." Elara yanked her arm from his grasp. "Oh, relax, Kael. It was a spur-of-the-moment thing, a little theatrical flourish. Your family clearly adored it." Truth be told, her heart was still hammering from her own audacity. "Adored it," he seethed. "They're planning the wedding, Elara. Aunt Maeve is already talking about heirloom lace." Just then, his older brother, Arthur Jr., looking grave, approached them. "Kaelin, can I have a word?" Arthur Jr. glanced at Elara, then back at his brother. "It's about Aunt Maeve." Kael's anger instantly deflated, replaced by a stark concern. "What is it? Is she all right?" Arthur Jr. sighed, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "The excitement, it's a lot for her." Dr. Peterson called again. He reiterated that her condition, it's more fragile than she lets on. He said this news, your engagement, it's given her a remarkable boost. Her spirits are higher than they've been in months. He paused, his gaze heavy. He also said any significant shock or disappointment could be detrimental. The unspoken warning hung palpably in the air between them. Detrimental. It was a gentle word for a devastating possibility. Kael looked as if he'd been physically struck. He leaned against the cool stone wall, the fight completely gone from him. Elara watched, a cold knot forming in her own stomach. This wasn't part of the script she'd imagined. "So, this engagement," Kael said, his voice hollow, "it has to stand. For now." He wasn't asking. He was stating a grim fact. Because of Aunt Maeve, because of her fragile health and her profound joy, they were shackled to this lie. Elara felt a strange pang. It wasn't triumph. It was something alarmingly close to responsibility. What followed was a heavy silence, Kael staring blankly ahead, the weight of his aunt's wish, and now her health, pressing down on them both. The grand charade had just acquired life-or-death stakes, and the laughter felt very far away. A few days later, trapped in the opulent prison of the Blackwood estate as wedding preparations began to swirl, Elara decided direct sabotage was her only way out. If Kael couldn't end this, she'd make his family want to end it. During a formal family tea, tiny sandwiches, porcelain cups, and an atmosphere thick with well-bred expectation, Elara launched her offensive. "You know," she began, addressing Kael's perfectly coiffed stepmother, Beatrice, "Kael has been so supportive of my true career passion." Beatrice smiled indulgently. "Oh, and what is that, dear? Besides your lovely acting, of course." Elara beamed. "Professional interpretive dance with a primary focus on abstract emotional conveyance. Specifically, I'm hoping to tour a one-woman show exploring the existential angst of, say, a particularly misunderstood garden slug." She demonstrated with a fluid, slightly alarming wriggle of her shoulders and a pained expression. Kael, who was mid-sip of Earl Grey, choked, spraying tea in a most un-CEO-like fashion. Several family members blinked. "How expressive," Beatrice commented, her smile only faltering for a microsecond. Undeterred, Elara continued, "And then there's my dream of becoming a competitive cheese sculptor. The intricate work, the ephemeral nature of the medium, it speaks to the transience of life, doesn't it?" She sighed dramatically. "Of course it means our home will constantly smell of aging dairy, but Kael says he doesn't mind, do you, darling?" Kael was now staring at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror, mixed with a grudging sort of awe at her sheer audacity. "Not at all," he managed through gritted teeth. To Elara's utter astonishment and Kael's visible despair, the family didn't call for smelling salts or security. Instead, Aunt Maeve clapped her hands softly. "Oh, Elara, you are just so wonderfully unique, so full of life and artistic spirit. Kaelin needs someone who can bring a little delightful unpredictability into his overly structured world." Another cousin chimed in. "Yes, quite refreshing. Most of the girls Kaelin knew before were so terribly sensible." Elara could only stare. Her attempts to appear utterly unsuitable, completely bonkers, had somehow made her more endearing to them. They didn't see a liability. They saw a quirky, free-spirited artist who would be good for Kael. Her sabotage had backfired, spectacularly, and Kael looked like he was seriously contemplating becoming a monk. The next thing Elara knew, she was being whisked away on a wedding dress shopping expedition, not by a reluctant Kael, but by an enthusiastic Beatrice and a quietly thrilled Aunt Maeve. Kael had mumbled something about a vital conference call he absolutely couldn't miss, escaping with the harried look of a man fleeing a burning building. The bridal boutique was a palace of white silk, lace, and shimmering tulle. It smelled of lilies and money, lots of money. Elara, still reeling from her failed sabotage attempt, felt like an imposter in a fairy tale. "Oh, this one, Elara, try this one," Aunt Maeve urged, pointing to a confection of a gown that probably cost more than Elara's entire student loan debt. Elara allowed herself to be ushered into a plush fitting room, assistants fluttering around her. Dress after dress was presented, each one more breathtaking, more expensive than the last. She felt like she was playing dress-up in someone else's dream. Then Beatrice brought in a gown. It was simpler than the others, elegant, with delicate beading that shimmered like captured starlight. It was, without a doubt, the most beautiful dress Elara had ever seen. This was... well, I'd hoped my own daughter might wear it one day, Beatrice said softly, a wistful look in her kind eyes. But I think it would be perfect for you, Elara. If you like it. Elara swallowed hard. The sincerity in Beatrice's voice, the quiet generosity, was like a physical blow. This woman, Kael's stepmother, who had every reason to be suspicious or distant, was treating her with such warmth, such open-hearted acceptance. When Elara stepped out in the gown, a hush fell over the small group. Aunt Maeve teared up. Beatrice simply smiled, a gentle maternal expression. "Oh, my dear," Beatrice breathed, "you look radiant." She then added, almost as an aside to the hovering consultant, "We'll take this one, and please, add the Mother of the Bride ensemble I admired earlier to Mr. Blackwood's account." Elara's breath caught. The casual way Beatrice offered to pay for such an extravagantly expensive dress, the kindness in her eyes, the genuine happiness radiating from her and Aunt Maeve, it was overwhelming. The weight of the lie, of the deception she was perpetuating, pressed down on Elara with sudden, crushing force. These wonderful, kind people were investing their emotions, their hopes, their money in a sham. And for the first time since this whole crazy charade began, Elara felt a profound, sickening pang of guilt. This wasn't a game anymore. It was hurting people, or it would eventually. As the days melted into a week, the wedding plans snowballed with alarming speed. Invitations were being designed, flower arrangements discussed, and catering menus tasted. Elara found herself swept along, a reluctant participant in a play that was rapidly becoming her reality. Kael remained distant, alternating between simmering resentment and a weary resignation whenever they were forced to interact for the sake of appearances. But something else was happening too, something Elara hadn't anticipated. She was connecting with his family. Beatrice, with her gentle wisdom and quiet humor, often sought Elara out for little chats, sharing stories about Kael's childhood, her eyes twinkling. Elara learned Kael had a surprising fondness for stray animals as a boy and a hidden talent for baking disastrously bad cookies. These small, humanizing details chipped away at the image of the cold, calculating CEO. Aunt Maeve, though her energy levels varied, would often ask Elara to read to her or simply sit and talk about books and art, real art, not Elara's fabricated slug-based interpretive dances. In those quiet moments, Elara saw not just a frail, sick woman, but a sharp, witty mind and a deeply loving heart. She found herself genuinely enjoying Maeve's company, making her laugh with silly stories from her own real acting auditions. The more time Elara spent with them, the more she liked them. Their kindness wasn't an act. Their affection for Kael, and by extension for her, felt startlingly real. They weren't just the rich family anymore. They were Beatrice, who worried about Kael working too hard, and Maeve, whose eyes lit up when she spoke of her nephew's future happiness. And with this growing affection came a deepening, gnawing guilt. Every smile she faked, every loving glance she manufactured for Kael when the family was watching, felt like a betrayal. She was deceiving these good people, people who were opening their hearts and their homes to her. One afternoon, helping Beatrice sort through old family photo albums for a sentimental wedding display, Elara saw a picture of a young Kael, perhaps 10 years old, grinning gap-toothed, proudly holding up a lopsided, slightly burnt cake. Beatrice chuckled. His first attempt at baking my birthday cake. He was so proud. Elara looked at the image of the happy, innocent boy, then thought of the guarded, cynical man he'd become. And then she thought of the elaborate lie she was a part of, a lie that was supposed to bring this family joy but was built on nothing but falsehood. The weight of it settled in her chest, heavy and cold. The fun was gone. The thrill of the performance had faded. All that remained was the uncomfortable truth. She was in too deep, and the thought of the inevitable fallout made her feel sick to her stomach. This charade was no longer a game of wits against Kael. It was becoming a betrayal of people she was starting to genuinely care about. The warm, convivial atmosphere of the Blackwood family luncheon shattered with the arrival of a sleek, blood-red sports car that purred up the driveway like a predator. Moments later, a woman emerged, all long legs, wind-tousled blonde hair, and an air of someone who never had to wait in line for anything. Elara, observing from the veranda with Beatrice and Aunt Maeve, felt an instant, inexplicable prickle of unease. "Oh my," Beatrice murmured, her smile tightening just a fraction. "That looks like Serafina." Aunt Maeve's expression clouded over. "Serafina? What on earth is she doing here?" Kael, who had been discussing some business matter on his phone nearby, froze mid-sentence. His head snapped up. The color drained from his face, replaced by a look Elara hadn't seen before, a mix of dread and something akin to old, unwelcome ghosts. "Serafina," he bit out, ending his call abruptly. And then Serafina was upon them, gliding across the manicured lawn with the confidence of a queen returning to her castle. "Kaelin, darling." Her voice was husky, dripping with a familiarity that made Elara's teeth ache. She air-kissed him, leaving a faint scent of expensive, exotic perfume in her wake. "I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd pop by. You don't mind, do you?" It wasn't a question. Kael looked like he minded very much. "Serafina, this is unexpected." Her gaze, sharp and assessing, flicked to Elara, then to Beatrice and Maeve. A slow, knowing smile spread across her perfectly painted lips. "So, this is the happy little family gathering I've been hearing whispers about." Her eyes lingered on Elara, a cool, dismissive once-over. "And you must be the new flavor of the month?" Elara felt Kael tense beside her. Before he could speak, Elara offered a bright, slightly too wide smile. "Elara Vance, Kael's fiancée, actually. And you are?" The word fiancé seemed to hang in the air, a small, defiant bomb. Serafina's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose a fraction. "Fiancé? Well, well, Kaelin, you always were full of surprises." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The battle lines, it seemed, had just been drawn. Later, Serafina cornered Elara near the elaborate dessert table, a saccharine smile plastered on her face that didn't fool Elara for a second. Kael was trapped across the room, being helpfully monopolized by his beaming Aunt Maeve, who was already discussing potential honeymoon destinations for the happy couple. "So, Elara," Serafina began, her voice like velvet over steel, "Kaelin never mentioned you, and believe me, we were very close. He tells me everything." The implication was clear. Elara picked up a delicate pastry. "Well, things change, don't they? People move on, or in some cases, get engaged." She took a bite, meeting Serafina's gaze with a sweetness that felt almost dangerous. Serafina chuckled, a low, throaty sound. "Engaged? Yes. It's all very sudden. Especially for Kaelin. He's usually so cautious, so particular." Her eyes scanned Elara from head to toe. "Tell me, where did Kael find someone like you? You're not exactly his usual type." The insult, though veiled, landed like a tiny poisoned dart. "Oh, you know," Elara said breezily. "Sometimes the unexpected things are the best. I guess I just swept him off his feet." "Didn't I, darling?" she called out, just as Kael managed to extricate himself and was heading their way. Kael looked from Serafina's predatory smile to Elara's innocent one, his expression that of a man walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. "Absolutely," he said, trying to sound convincing, though his eyes shot Elara a look that was part warning, part plea. He slipped an arm around Elara's waist, a gesture that felt surprisingly protective. "Elara is one of a kind." "I'm sure she is," Serafina purred, her gaze lingering on Kael's hand on Elara's waist. "It must be quite a change for you, Elara, all this." She waved a dismissive hand around the opulent room. "It's a very different world from, say, community theater and, what was it Kaelin's aunt said you did? Interpretive slug dancing." Elara's smile didn't waver, even as Kael stiffened. "Oh, the slug dancing is just a passion project. Pays terribly. Luckily, Kaelin is wonderfully supportive and very generous." She patted Kyle's chest. "Besides, I find this world quite adaptable. It's all just a performance, isn't it? And I'm a very quick study." Serafina's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. She knew something was off. Elara could feel the suspicion radiating from her, as tangible as her cloying perfume. This wasn't just a casual visit. Serafina was hunting for something. That evening, as Elara was trying to mentally decompress from Serafina's unnerving presence, Kael found her in the library, his face grim. "We need to talk." Before he could elaborate, Serafina appeared in the doorway, a triumphant, predatory glint in her eyes. She held a slim tablet in her hand. "No need to whisper, Kaelin, darling. I think Elara should hear this too." She sauntered into the room. "You know, it's amazing what one can find out with a few well-placed calls. Old friends in event planning, a disgruntled temp from your HR department who remembers a rather unusual hiring request." She tapped the tablet. "A companion for a family event, an actress paid for her time. And then, suddenly, a whirlwind engagement." Kael's jaw tightened. "What do you want, Serafina?" "What I've always wanted, Kaelin. What's rightfully mine." Her gaze flickered with a possessiveness that made Elara shiver. "But for now, let's call it compensation for my silence. Imagine how devastated your dear Aunt Maeve would be to learn this whole fairy tale is a sham. Her fragile heart. It might just break, wouldn't it?" The threat was vile, delivered with a chilling sweetness. Elara felt a surge of fury on behalf of the Blackwood family, these people Serafina was so callously targeting. "How much?" Kael asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Serafina named a figure that made Elara gasp. It was astronomical, enough to fund a small country, or at least Elara's entire acting career for a decade. "You have 24 hours to arrange the transfer, Kaelin," Serafina said, her smile wide and cruel, "or the truth comes out, and this charming little engagement," she glanced disdainfully at Elara, "goes up in flames, along with your family's precious illusions." She turned and walked out, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and suffocating silence in her wake. Kael sank into a chair, looking utterly defeated for a moment. "Damn her," he muttered, running a hand over his face. Elara stared at him. They were trapped. Properly, royally trapped. And this time, it wasn't by their own making. It was by a viper who knew exactly where to strike. What were they going to do now? The silence in the library stretched, thick with the remnants of Serafina's venomous threat. Kael finally looked up, his eyes hard, a new resolve dawning in them. "I won't pay her, not a dime." Elara nodded, a strange sense of solidarity blooming amidst the panic. "Good, she doesn't deserve it. But, Aunt Maeve—" "I know." Kael cut in, his voice rough. "We can't let her find out the truth. Not like this. Not from Serafina." He began to pace, the caged energy of a predator back in his movements. "There has to be another way." Elara watched him, her mind racing. The original lie, the fake dating, the fake engagement, was a tangled mess. But Serafina's threat had changed the game. Now it wasn't just about protecting Kael's image or Elara's payday. It was about protecting a genuinely kind family from a cruel blow, especially Aunt Maeve. "What if," Elara began slowly, an idea forming as risky and audacious as her engagement announcement, "what if we tell them a truth? Just not the whole truth?" Kael stopped pacing. He looked at her, intrigued. "Go on." "Serafina knows you hired me. That part is out there, or it will be if she talks, so we get ahead of it." Elara took a breath. "We tell them that yes, you initially hired me as a companion. Maybe you were, I don't know, tired of matchmaking attempts, or you needed a buffer for this specific family event." Kael was listening intently, a flicker of something, hope, respect, in his eyes. "But then," Elara continued, warming to her theme, "the unexpected happened. We actually connected. We spent time together, and what started as a business arrangement blossomed into something real. The engagement was perhaps impulsive, rushed by genuine emotion, not a calculated lie." She met his gaze. "It's still a lie, Kael, but it's a kinder one. One that makes you look human. And it makes our feelings for each other the core of the story, not a financial transaction." He was silent for a long moment, considering it. It was a huge gamble. Would the family buy it? Would it be enough to defang Serafina if she tried to expose them? "It's plausible," he admitted. "More plausible than them believing I'd suddenly proposed to a stranger out of the blue, perhaps." He looked at Elara, a wry twist to his lips. "You're suggesting we confess to a lesser crime to avoid conviction for a greater one." "Exactly," Elara said, "and we do it together, a united front." The unspoken challenge hung between them. Could they pull it off? Could they sell this new, improved version of their lie? More importantly, could they trust each other enough to even try? Kael looked at her, and for the first time, Elara didn't see a cold CEO or an irritated taskmaster. She saw a man fighting for his family, a man who was perhaps just as trapped and desperate as she was. "All right, Vance," he said, a reluctant alliance forged in the crucible of blackmail. "Let's go tell another story." The next morning, Kael and Elara faced the assembled Blackwood family in the grand drawing room. The air was thick with unspoken questions, a result of Serafina's poisonous visit, and perhaps Kael's terse announcement that they had something to share. Aunt Maeve looked particularly fragile, her eyes searching Kael's face for reassurance. Beatrice offered a small, encouraging smile. Kael stood beside Elara, a united front they'd barely rehearsed. He started, his voice steady, though Elara could feel the tension radiating from him. "There's something we need to tell you all, about how Elara and I began." He explained with a carefully edited honesty that yes, facing immense pressure to be in a relationship and needing a companion for family events, he had, unconventionally, hired Elara. Elara watched the family's expressions shift from curiosity to surprise, a few eyebrows arching. This was the riskiest part. Then Elara stepped in, her voice soft but clear. "It was supposed to be just an arrangement. I needed the work, and Kael needed, well, me, apparently." A small, self-deprecating smile played on her lips. "But what we didn't expect," she continued, her gaze finding Kael's, a flicker of something surprisingly genuine passing between them, "was to actually enjoy each other's company, to talk for hours, to laugh." Kael picked up the narrative seamlessly. "Those first few weeks, what started as a pretense began to feel real. The lines blurred. I found myself looking forward to our fake dates more than any real ones I'd been on. He even managed a small, rueful smile. The engagement, we admit, was impulsive, perhaps a bit rushed. He reached for Elara's hand, his fingers lacing through hers, a gesture that felt less like acting and more like an anchor. But it wasn't born from deception, not in the way it might seem. It was born from unexpected and very real feelings. He looked directly at Aunt Maeve. "I know this is unorthodox, but Elara makes me happy, Aunt Maeve. Happier than I've been in a very long time." The confession hung in the air. Elara held her breath, her hand surprisingly steady in Kael's. Had they sold it? Or had they just dug an even deeper hole? For a long moment, the only sound in the drawing room was the ticking of the grandfather clock. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. Kael's hand was a warm, solid presence in hers. Then Aunt Maeve's face, which had been a canvas of conflicting emotions, softened. A slow, tremulous smile spread across her lips. "Oh, Kaelin," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "My dear boy." She rose, a little unsteadily, and came towards them. Beatrice was right behind her, her expression unreadable, but not unkind. Aunt Maeve reached out and took both their joined hands in hers. "Unorthodox?" she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Perhaps. But love often is, isn't it?" She looked from Kael to Elara, her gaze surprisingly perceptive. "I always knew there was more to you, Kaelin, than just boardrooms and balance sheets. And Elara, dear." She smiled at Elara. "I saw a spark in you from the moment you arrived. A genuine one." Beatrice then spoke, her voice calm and reassuring. "Kaelin, hiring Elara initially, it might seem strange to some, but knowing how private you are, how much pressure you've been under, I can almost understand it as an act of, well, self-preservation, and then, for that to turn into something real?" She shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's rather romantic, actually, like something out of a story." Arthur Jr. even cracked a rare smile. "Well, it certainly explains why you were so smitten at the party, Kael. Never seen you quite so attentive." Elara and Kael exchanged a look of stunned relief. They'd bought it. Not only had they bought it, but the family had somehow twisted their convoluted partial truth confession into an even more romantic narrative. Kael's initial deception was now reframed as a desperate man's unconventional path to true love, and Elara was the catalyst for his happiness. The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by a fresh wave of warmth and acceptance. The family embraced their story, their belief in Kael and Elara's love apparently stronger than ever. As Elara found herself enveloped in a hug by Aunt Maeve, she caught Kael's eye over his aunt's shoulder. He looked as bewildered and as profoundly relieved as she felt. Their gamble had paid off, but the lie, in its new romanticized form, felt more binding than ever. With Serafina's immediate threat neutralized for now, and the family fully on board with their love story, Kael and Elara found themselves in the strange limbo of their extended stay at the Blackwood estate. The wedding plans continued, albeit with a new, slightly surreal layer, given their confession. Confined by circumstance and the ever-watchful eyes of the loving family, they began to spend more time together, not performing, but simply existing in the same space. The nights were the most telling. After the family retired, a quiet sort of truce would settle between them. They'd often find themselves the last ones awake, lingering in the vast, silent library or the dimly lit conservatory. And slowly, hesitantly, they started to talk. Really talk. One night, surrounded by the scent of old books and Earl Grey tea, Elara found herself telling Kael about her own family, her absent father, her fiercely independent but often struggling mother, the dreams she'd poured into her acting career, and the constant gnawing fear of failure. She spoke of the vulnerability of an artist, the rejections that felt like tiny paper cuts to the soul, the desperate hope for that one breakthrough. Kael listened, truly listened, without the cool detachment of the CEO or the exasperation of her reluctant fake fiancé. And then, to her surprise, he began to share pieces of himself. He spoke of the immense pressure of the Blackwood name, the loneliness of a childhood spent in boardrooms and at business dinners, the shadow of his demanding, now deceased, father. He even mentioned Serafina, not with anger, but with a weary sort of sadness, hinting at a past where he'd been more open, more trusting, and badly burned. "I built walls," he admitted, his voice low, "because it seemed safer." These weren't the dramatic, flamboyant stories Elara spun for the family. These were quiet truths, shared in hushed tones, admissions of fear, of past hurts, of vulnerabilities they rarely showed the world. Between one breath and the next, the carefully constructed facades they presented to everyone else, and even to each other, began to crack. There was no pretense in these late-night confessions, no agenda. Just two people, caught in an absurd situation, finding an unexpected solace in shared honesty. A fragile connection was forming, woven from whispered secrets and a dawning, mutual understanding that went far beyond their fabricated romance. The air thickened with something new, something unsaid, but deeply felt. What followed was a subtle shift in their dynamic, a current of unspoken awareness that hummed beneath the surface of their interactions. During the day they were still Kael and Elara, the soon-to-be married couple, playing their roles for the family. But in the quiet moments, the stolen glances, the accidental brushes of hands, something else was taking root. Elara found herself noticing things about Kael she hadn't before. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he genuinely smiled, a rare but increasingly frequent occurrence when they were alone. The focused intensity when he spoke about something he was passionate about, which surprisingly wasn't always business. The unexpected gentleness he showed towards his Aunt Maeve. His scent, a clean, masculine mix of expensive cologne and something uniquely Kael, would sometimes catch her off guard, making her breath hitch. What is wrong with me, she'd think, her heart doing a strange little flutter. This was Kael Blackwood, the infuriating, arrogant man who'd hired her. Yet, Kael too seemed to be seeing Elara differently, the sharp, witty woman who could hold her own against his family, and even a manipulative ex, was also the woman who spoke with such raw passion about her dreams, whose laughter was surprisingly infectious, whose presence, he was starting to realize, he didn't entirely mind. He'd catch himself watching her when she wasn't aware, the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating, the animated way she used her hands when she told a story, the genuine warmth in her eyes when she interacted with Beatrice or Maeve. Once, while reaching for the same sugar bowl at breakfast, their fingers brushed. A jolt, undeniably electric, shot up his arm. He pulled back as if burned, a strange tightness in his chest. He saw a flicker of surprise and something else he couldn't quite name in her eyes before she looked away. Neither of them spoke of it. The conversations about their pasts had opened a door to emotional intimacy, but this burgeoning physical awareness, this unacknowledged attraction, was a far more dangerous territory. It was a silent hum beneath their forced proximity, a spark threatening to ignite in the carefully constructed edifice of their lie. The space between them felt charged, alive with unspoken possibilities and unadmitted desires. Her world tilted ever so slightly whenever he was near. And his, he was slowly realizing, felt a little less empty when she was. The wedding plans surged forward like an unstoppable tidal wave. Elara found herself adrift in a sea of floral arrangements, catering decisions and seating charts, each detail a fresh stab of guilt. Beatrice, bless her organized heart, had enlisted a formidable wedding planner named Penelope, who spoke in hushed, reverent tones about aisle aesthetics and tablescape harmony. It was all so beautiful, so heartfelt, so fake. "Now, Elara dear," Penelope chirped one afternoon, brandishing swatches of silk, "for the bridesmaids' sashes, do we prefer blush or bashful?" Elara stared at the nearly identical pink squares. I prefer bolting for the door, she thought. Either is lovely, Penelope, she managed, a weak smile plastered on her face. Kael, when he was present for these planning sessions, usually hovered in the background, looking as uncomfortable as Elara felt, though he masked it better with a stoic, CEO-like inscrutability. He'd offer curt approvals, his mind clearly elsewhere, probably on how to escape this ever-deepening charade. But his occasional brief glances at Elara were no longer just annoyed. Sometimes she thought she saw a flicker of shared bewilderment, almost sympathy. The sheer scale of it all was overwhelming. The guest list ran into the hundreds. The discussions about a 5-tier cake, a string quartet, and even a potential ice sculpture of a swan, Aunt Maeve's whimsical suggestion, made Elara's head spin. Each decision, each enthusiastic nod from a family member, cemented the lie further, making it heavier, more impossible to escape. She was an actress in a runaway production, and she'd completely lost the script. More importantly, she was starting to dread the final act. Because of this, sleep became a luxury, her nights filled with anxious thoughts and the faces of the kind, trusting Blackwoods she was deceiving. The joy everyone else radiated only highlighted the hollowness inside her. This grand, beautiful wedding felt less like a celebration and more like an elaborate, beautifully decorated trap closing in around her. The bridal shower was an ambush of pastel colors, delicate china, and heartfelt sentimentality. Elara sat on a plush armchair designated as the throne, while a mountain of beautifully wrapped gifts grew at her feet. Each present, unwrapped to oohs and ahs from Beatrice, Aunt Maeve, and a dozen other smiling women, felt like another brand on her conscience. There were elegant linens, crystal champagne flutes, a silver picture frame, for your first official portrait as Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood. Each gift was a testament to the family's generosity, their excitement, their unwavering belief in this love story Elara and Kael had concocted. With every ribbon untied, Elara's smile felt more strained, her heart heavier. Then Aunt Maeve, her eyes shining with a soft, emotional light, presented her gift. It wasn't large, just a small, velvet-covered box. "This, my dear Elara," she said, her voice gentle, "belonged to my grandmother. She wore it on her wedding day, as did my mother, and as did I." Elara's breath caught. Inside the box, nestled on a bed of faded satin, lay a delicate pearl and diamond lavalier necklace. It was exquisite, timeless, and clearly priceless, not just in monetary value, but in sentimental worth. "I always hoped," Aunt Maeve continued, her voice trembling slightly, "that Kaelin's bride would wear it. It's a symbol of enduring love, of family, of happiness." She carefully lifted the necklace and, with slightly trembling hands, fastened it around Elara's neck. The cool weight of the pearls against Elara's skin felt like ice. "It looks perfect on you, my dear." Tears pricked Elara's eyes, not tears of joy, but of profound, suffocating guilt. These people were entrusting her with their history, their hopes, their most treasured heirlooms, all based on a lie. She felt like the lowest kind of fraud, a thief stealing not jewels, but emotions. How could she possibly go through with this? How could she stand at an altar, wearing this symbol of true love, knowing her own part in this was a complete fabrication? The beauty of the gift, the depth of Aunt Maeve's affection, it was all too much. The weight of the necklace was nothing compared to the crushing weight on her soul. Despite the mounting guilt, or perhaps because of the shared pressure, something undeniable was shifting between Elara and Kael. The late-night talks had cracked open a door to vulnerability, and now flickers of unfeigned warmth and an almost startling chemistry were beginning to spark between them. It started with small things. In front of the family, their affectionate gestures became less rehearsed, more natural. A casual touch of his hand on the small of her back as they walked into a room, a shared smile over a family joke that wasn't entirely faked, him instinctively reaching for her hand when Aunt Maeve had a coughing fit. These moments felt less like acting and more like reflex. Even when they were alone, The dynamic was changing. The sharp edges of their earlier interactions were softening. One evening, Elara was struggling with a particularly complicated calligraphy pen, attempting to address a wedding invitation, another task she'd been roped into. She let out a frustrated sigh. Without a word, Kael, who had been reading nearby, reached over, his fingers brushing hers as he gently took the pen. "Like this," he murmured, his voice surprisingly soft as he guided her hand, showing her the correct angle. His proximity, the unexpected, patient instruction, the warmth of his hand covering hers. Elara's breath caught. The air between them suddenly felt charged, thick with an unspoken awareness. He seemed to realize it too, his gaze lifting to meet hers, a questioning, almost hesitant look in his eyes before he quickly pulled away, clearing his throat. Another time, they were reviewing the ridiculous wedding playlist Penelope had compiled. When a particularly cheesy love song came on, Elara couldn't help but snort with laughter. To her surprise, Kael cracked a genuine, unguarded smile. "Truly awful, isn't it?" he'd said, and for a moment, they were just two people sharing a private joke, the lie momentarily forgotten. These instances, fleeting as they were, began to accumulate. A shared glance across a crowded room that lingered a second too long. Him finding her a specific brand of tea she'd idly mentioned liking. Her instinctively straightening his tie before a family photo. The lines weren't just blurring, they were actively being redrawn by an invisible hand, pulling them closer, tangling their carefully constructed charade with threads of something confusingly, dangerously real, and neither of them knew quite what to do about it. The day before the wedding, the Blackwood estate was a hive of frantic, joyful activity. Flowers were arriving by the truckload, musicians were rehearsing in the garden, and distant relatives were beginning to descend. For Elara, it was the countdown to her personal doomsday. The guilt, the pressure, the confusing, burgeoning feelings for Kael, and the sheer weight of the lie had become an unbearable burden. She found Kael in his study, ostensibly reviewing some last-minute details with the wedding planner, but his expression was distant, strained. Penelope, sensing the tension, quickly excused herself. Silence descended, thick and suffocating. Elara felt like a tightly wound spring, ready to snap. "Kael," she began, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "Kael, I can't do this." He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Can't do what, Elara? Endure one more discussion about napkin rings?" There was a harsh edge to his voice. "No," she said, tears welling in her eyes, all pretense gone. "I can't marry you. I can't go through with the wedding tomorrow." The words tumbled out, raw and desperate. "It's all a lie, Kael. A horrible, complicated lie, and it's not fair to your family, it's not fair to Aunt Maeve, and I just can't stand up there tomorrow and pretend anymore." She was breathing heavily, the confession leaving her feeling exposed and terrified. "I know this messes everything up. I know about Serafina, about Aunt Maeve's health, but there has to be another way. I can't be the person who does this to them. I can't." Kael stared at her, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something else she couldn't decipher. He'd clearly expected her to play her part until the bitter end, however that was supposed to look. Her sudden, tearful refusal, her complete unraveling just hours before the final curtain, had thrown him completely. The silence stretched, broken only by Elara's ragged breathing. This was it, her breaking point. She'd laid her cards on the table, risking his fury, the family's devastation, everything. But the thought of walking down that aisle, a fraud in a priceless gown, had become an impossibility. What would he do? What could he possibly say? Kael stared at Elara, her tearful confession hanging between them like a physical weight. The initial shock on his face slowly morphed into a deep, weary anguish. He ran a hand through his hair, looking older, more burdened than she'd ever seen him. "You can't back out now, Elara," he said, his voice low, strained. "Not now." "But Kael, it's wrong," she pleaded, fresh tears spilling. "Every smile, every touch. It feels like I'm twisting a knife in their backs. And Aunt Maeve—" "Exactly," Kael interrupted, his gaze locking onto hers, desperate and raw. "Aunt Maeve, do you have any idea what this wedding, what you mean to her right now? Her doctors? They're not optimistic, Elara. This happiness, this belief that I'm settled and loved, it's practically keeping her going." He took a hesitant step towards her. "I know it's a lie. God, don't you think I know that? I live it every second I'm with them too." His own vulnerability was a surprise, a crack in his usually impenetrable armor. But if you call this off now, the disappointment, the shock, it could literally— He couldn't finish the sentence, his voice thick with an emotion Elara recognized as fear, real, gut-wrenching fear. He was right. She knew he was right. The image of Aunt Maeve's gentle, hopeful face, her frail health, it was a vice around Elara's heart. "Just one more day, Elara," Kael pleaded, his voice barely a whisper now. He reached out, his fingers lightly touching her arm, a plea in his touch as much as in his words. "Just get through the ceremony. For her. We can figure out the after later. An annulment, a quiet separation, whatever it takes. But please, just give her this one day of happiness. Can you do that? For her?" His eyes, usually so guarded, were stripped bare, showing a desperation that mirrored her own. It wasn't the CEO demanding. It was a nephew terrified of losing someone he loved. How could she refuse that? How could she be the one to potentially break that fragile thread of hope? Elara's shoulders slumped. The fight went out of her, replaced by a heavy, aching resignation. "One day," she choked out, the words tasting like ash. "For Aunt Maeve. But Kael, after that I'm done. This whole thing, it has to end." He nodded, a wave of profound relief washing over his features, quickly followed by a renewed shadow of the immense burden they shared. "One day," he agreed. "Thank you, Elara." The chasm between them felt both wider and, paradoxically, a little less empty. They were still trapped, but now they were trapped with a shared, agonizing purpose. The rehearsal dinner that evening was an exercise in excruciatingly polished pretense. Elara and Kael, armed with their fragile one-day truce, moved through the elegantly decorated room like perfectly programmed animatronics of a loving couple. Every smile felt like a grimace stretched into shape, every shared laugh a carefully timed sound effect. Kael kept his hand on the small of her back, a proprietary gesture that probably looked wonderfully romantic to the beaming relatives. To Elara, it felt like a brand, a constant reminder of their pact. When he leaned in to whisper something in her ear, a necessary piece of stage business, as his cousin recounted an old family anecdote, his breath fanned her skin, sending an unwelcome shiver down her spine. It wasn't entirely unpleasant, which only made her feel worse. "You're doing great," he murmured, his lips close to her ear, his eyes scanning the room. "They're all buying it." "Just peachy," she whispered back, forcing a dazzling smile as Aunt Maeve caught her eye and blew her a kiss. "I feel like a fraud accepting an Oscar for a role I despise." He squeezed her waist gently. "Almost there." They endured the toasts, the well-wishes, the sentimental stories. Elara found herself responding on autopilot, her acting skills honed by years of auditions pushed to their absolute limit. She laughed, she blushed, she gazed at Kael with what she hoped looked like adoring affection. He, in turn, played the part of the devoted fiancé with a surprising, if somewhat stiff, conviction. Perhaps he was a better actor than she gave him credit for, or perhaps, like her, he was just running on sheer, desperate adrenaline. The constant proximity, the forced intimacy of their public displays began to fray Elara's nerves. When he'd casually drape an arm around her shoulder, or when their hands brushed as they reached for a champagne flute, the unacknowledged current between them would flare, hot and confusing. It was a dangerous undercurrent beneath the smooth surface of their performance, threatening to pull them both under. Each feigned caress, each loving look they exchanged for the benefit of their audience, was a strange mix of torture and something else, something that made her stomach flip, in a way that had nothing to do with guilt and everything to do with the man beside her. Then came the moment for Liam, Kael's old college friend. An aspiring actor, Elara vaguely remembered Kael mentioning he'd hired to officiate, someone who could deliver lines with conviction, to give a sort of pre-wedding blessing. Elara had expected something light, perhaps a few amusing anecdotes about Kael. Instead, Liam, looking surprisingly solemn in his borrowed clerical collar, spoke with a quiet, profound sincerity that caught everyone off guard. "Marriage," Liam began, his voice resonating through the suddenly hushed room, "is a remarkable thing. It's more than just a contract, more than a public declaration. It's a leap of faith, a promise to walk together, to face the storms and cherish the sunshine, side by side." Elara felt Kael shift uncomfortably beside her. Liam's words, so earnest and true, were like little daggers aimed directly at their charade. "It's about vulnerability," Liam continued, his gaze sweeping over Kael and Elara, a gentle, knowing look in his eyes that made Elara's skin crawl. Did he suspect? "It's about seeing another person, truly seeing them, their flaws, their fears, their hidden strengths, and loving them not despite those things, but because of them. It's about creating a sanctuary, a safe harbor where two souls can be their truest selves." Elara risked a glance at Kael. His face was pale, his jaw tight. He was staring straight ahead, but she could see the muscle working in his cheek. Liam's words were clearly hitting their mark, and not in a comfortable way. "It's not always easy," Liam concluded, his voice softening. "There will be challenges, doubts, moments when it feels easier to walk away, but the beauty of a true marriage, the strength of it, lies in choosing each other again and again, in forgiveness, in unwavering commitment, in a love that endures." A heartfelt sigh rippled through the family members. Aunt Maeve was openly weeping. Beatrice dabbed her eyes. Even Kael's stoic older brother looked moved. Elara and Kael, however, felt exposed, flayed. The actor, hired to perform a role, had just delivered a sermon on authenticity that made their entire relationship feel like a sacrilege. The irony was a bitter pill. As Liam raised his glass, to true love in all its messy, glorious forms, Elara couldn't meet Kael's eyes. The weight of their lie, of the beautiful sacred thing they were making a mockery of, felt heavier than ever. "And now," boomed Kael's Uncle Charles, a jovial man who'd had perhaps one too many glasses of champagne, "before the night is over, I think we need to see a proper kiss from the happy couple. A little practice for tomorrow, eh?" A chorus of laughter and agreement went around the room. Elara froze. Kael looked equally horrified. This was not part of their script. "Oh, yes," Aunt Maeve chimed in, clapping her hands delightedly. "A lovely idea, Charles." There was no escaping it. All eyes were on them, expectant, beaming. To refuse would be unthinkable, impossibly suspicious. Kael turned to Elara, a look of sheer panic in his eyes, quickly masked by a strained smile for the audience. "Shall we, darling?" he murmured, his voice tight. Elara's heart was pounding like a trapped bird. "Just act," she told herself. "It's one kiss, part of the performance." He leaned in. She tilted her head up. It was supposed to be a brief, chaste press of lips, convincing enough for the onlookers, meaningless for them. That was the plan. But then, the moment their lips met, something ignited. A spark, a jolt. The carefully constructed walls between them, the layers of pretense and resentment and unspoken feelings just crumbled. It wasn't a chaste kiss. It wasn't an act. His hand, which had been resting lightly on her waist, slid around to her back, pulling her closer, deepening the kiss with a sudden, desperate hunger. Elara's hands, which had been hovering awkwardly, flew up to his shoulders, her fingers tangling in his hair. The world narrowed to the taste of him, the scent of him, the surprising, shocking softness of his lips moving against hers. It was a kiss of pent-up frustration, of unspoken longing, of a terrifying, undeniable connection that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. Fire bloomed beneath her skin, her breath caught. The space between them burned. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, the room was momentarily silent, stunned by the raw, unexpected passion they'd just witnessed. Then it erupted into cheers and applause louder than anything before. Aunt Maeve looked ecstatic. Elara and Kael stared at each other, their eyes wide, their faces flushed. They were both trembling. The carefully managed charade had just been blown apart by a single, electrifying, and utterly real kiss. What had they done? And more importantly, what happened now? The morning of the wedding dawned bright and achingly beautiful, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside Elara. She sat in the lavish bridal suite, a vision in the pearl and diamond lavalier and the exquisite gown Beatrice had gifted her, feeling like a beautifully packaged lie. Her reflection stared back, a stranger with haunted eyes. Last night's kiss with Kael had shattered her carefully constructed composure. It wasn't an act, it was something terrifyingly real, a wildfire that had leaped between them, consuming all her well-rehearsed defenses. Beatrice fussed around her, her gentle presence both a comfort and a torment. "You look breathtaking, my dear," she said, her eyes soft with affection. "Kaelin is a lucky man." Elara could only manage a weak smile. Lucky? He was shackled to a fraud. Then a light knock on the door. It was Kael. He looked impossibly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, but his eyes, when they met hers, were filled with an unreadable emotion. He held out a small velvet box. This is for you," he said, his voice a little rough. Inside, nestled on satin, was a delicate silver bracelet, a single charm of a tiny, intricately carved theatrical mask. It was so... Elara, so unexpectedly thoughtful. "Kael," she breathed, her throat tight. "It's beautiful." "I know things have been complicated," he said, his gaze searching hers. "But today, just try to breathe, Elara, for Aunt Maeve, and maybe," he hesitated, "maybe for us too, just for today." That hint of charm, of a shared, fragile understanding after their kiss, only twisted the knot in her stomach tighter. Was he feeling it too, this terrifying pull? Or was this just another part of his performance trying to ensure she didn't bolt? Deep down she knew the truth. His gesture was kind, far kinder than she deserved. This kindness, this charm, it made the lie, her impending vows, feel like an even greater betrayal. Every beat of her heart was a countdown to a disaster of her own making. The music swelled, a triumphant, joyful sound that mocked Elara's inner turmoil. She stood at the back of the flower-decked aisle, her arm linked through Arthur Jr.'s, who was surprisingly gentle and reassuring. The faces of the Blackwood family and their friends blurred before her. And then she saw Kael, waiting at the altar, his expression tense but his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a crazy, fleeting second, it almost felt real. She took a step, another. The scent of lilies and roses filled the air. And then, a commotion at the back. A woman's voice, loud, shrill, and horribly familiar, cut through the serene atmosphere. "Stop this wedding! This whole thing is a sham!" Elara's blood ran cold. Her head whipped around. There, struggling with the ushers, was her estranged mother, her face flushed, her eyes wild. And beside her, a smug, triumphant smirk on her face, was Serafina. "Elara, honey, tell them!" her mother shrieked, her voice echoing through the stunned silence. "Tell them who you really are. Tell them about your dead-end jobs, the eviction notices. She's a nobody, a con artist. She's not good enough for them." Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at Elara's throat. This was her worst nightmare realized, public humiliation, exposure. Seraphina's eyes met hers, glinting with malicious satisfaction. The guests were murmuring, turning, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion. Aunt Maeve looked utterly stricken, her hand flying to her chest. Elara felt the world tilt, the beautiful wedding dissolving into a horrifying public spectacle. She wanted the ground to swallow her whole. This was it. The lie was about to explode, taking everyone down with it. Before Elara could faint, before her mother could spew any more venom, Kael moved. With a speed and decisiveness that stunned everyone, he strode down the aisle. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury, but his eyes, when they briefly met Elara's, held a spark of something else: reassurance, protection. Security. Kael's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and authoritative. Remove these women, now. Seraphina sputtered. Kaelin, darling, you can't possibly— I can and I will, he stated, his gaze like ice. He didn't even look at Elara's mother, who was now dissolving into incoherent sobs. Two burly security guards, materializing as if from nowhere, swiftly and efficiently escorted both screaming women from the premises. It was over in less than a minute. Kael turned back to face the stunned guests. His composure was remarkable. My apologies for that unfortunate interruption, he said, his voice calm, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. A disgruntled former acquaintance, it seems. Please, let us continue. He walked back to the altar, then turned and offered his hand to Elara, who was still trembling, rooted to the spot. His touch was firm, grounding. Are you all right? He murmured, his voice for her ears only, a surprising warmth lacing the concern. Elara could only nod, speechless. He had protected her. In front of everyone, without hesitation, he had shielded her from that horrifying onslaught. He hadn't questioned, hadn't wavered. He'd just acted. For her. The shock of it, the unexpectedness of his fierce defense, sent a wave of something warm and confusing through her, overriding the terror. He led her to the altar, his grip on her arm a silent promise of support. The ceremony, which had teetered on the brink of disaster, was somehow miraculously back on track, all thanks to Kael. The organ music resumed, a little shakily at first, then with renewed confidence. Liam, the actor-minister, looked a bit pale, but carried on with professional aplomb. Elara stood opposite Kael, her heart still pounding from the earlier chaos, her mind reeling from his protective intervention. The air between them crackled with an unspoken intensity. It was time for the vows. Kael spoke first, his voice surprisingly steady, his gaze fixed on Elara's. Elara, he began, and the way he said her name sent a shiver down her spine. When I met you, my life was predictable, orderly, and if I'm honest, a little empty. He paused, a flicker of something deep and unreadable in his eyes. You turned everything upside down. You brought chaos and color, and a spark I didn't realize was missing. His lips curved into a small, almost tender smile. You are unexpected and exasperating and surprisingly essential. I promise to face whatever comes next with you, to learn from you, and to cherish the light you've brought into my world. Were those his real feelings, or was he just an incredibly gifted actor, playing his part to perfection? Elara's heart ached with the uncertainty. Then it was her turn. The carefully rehearsed generic vows she'd memorized evaporated from her mind. Instead, words she hadn't planned, words fueled by the turmoil and the unexpected tenderness of the day, began to spill out. Kael, she said, her voice trembling but earnest, her eyes locked with his. I came into your life under unusual circumstances. A ripple of knowing, sympathetic laughter went through the guests. I thought this was just a role, a performance, but somewhere along the way, between the ridiculous rules and the unexpected kindness, I found something real. Tears welled in her eyes. You showed me a strength I didn't know I had, and a protection I never expected. You're infuriating and demanding and surprisingly wonderful." Her voice cracked. "I promise to be brave with you, to be honest in my own flawed way, and to never forget the man who stood by me, even when he didn't have to." The lines were completely blurred now. Actor and character, lie and truth, all tangled together in a messy, emotional knot. As Liam pronounced them husband and wife, at least for the purposes of this charade, Kael leaned in to kiss her. This time the kiss was softer, questioning, a silent acknowledgement of the raw emotion that had just passed between them. The applause was deafening, but Elara barely heard it. She was lost in Kael's eyes, wondering if this beautiful, chaotic, utterly fake wedding had somehow, impossibly, just become the realest moment of her life. The wedding reception was a whirlwind of clinking champagne glasses, heartfelt and occasionally tipsy toasts, and the relentless, joyful energy of the Blackwood clan. Elara and Kael, still reeling from the emotional intensity of the ceremony, the interruption, Kael's fierce protection, those shockingly raw vows, and that earth-shattering kiss, moved through it all in a daze. Their earlier pact to just get through the day for Aunt Maeve felt like a lifetime ago. Now, their performance as the happy couple was eerily convincing, perhaps because the lines between acting and reality had become so hopelessly, terrifyingly blurred. Kael kept a possessive arm around her waist, his touch no longer just for show, but a grounding presence in the swirling chaos. When they danced their obligatory first dance, to a song that was thankfully not on Penelope's cheesy list, but something slow and surprisingly soulful, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. They moved together, a little awkwardly at first, then with a growing unspoken rhythm. His eyes, when they met hers, held a new depth, a questioning intensity that mirrored the confusion in her own heart. The air between them crackled, thick with the memory of their kiss at the altar, a kiss that had tasted far too much like a beginning rather than an end. "You were incredible today," Kael murmured, his lips close to her ear as they swayed, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down her spine despite the warmth of the room. "When my mother and Seraphina, and your vows," Elara's heart did a complicated flip. "You weren't so bad yourself, Mr. Blackwood," she whispered back, trying for levity, but her voice was breathy. For a man who supposedly hates public displays of affection. He actually chuckled, a soft, genuine sound. Turns out, some displays are less objectionable than others. Despite that, the recent shared trauma of the ceremony's interruption, coupled with the escalating emotions stirred by their vows and that kiss, made their current charade feel almost too real. They were still performing, yes, but the masks felt like they were melting onto their skin. Later, as the reception began to wind down, Liam, the actor-turned-surprisingly poignant minister, caught Elara's eye from across the room. He looked agitated, nervously fiddling with the clerical collar he still wore, as if it were choking him. He gestured discreetly for her to join him near a quiet exit. "Elara," he began, his voice hushed and strained, his eyes darting around as if afraid of being overheard. "Can we talk, privately? It's really important." A knot of unease tightened in Elara's stomach. Liam had been a friend of Kael's, roped in to play a part. What could possibly be so urgent? He led her to a small, deserted anteroom, the distant sounds of music and laughter a stark contrast to the sudden, heavy tension between them. "Look, Elara," he stammered, wringing his hands. I don't know how to say this. I probably shouldn't be saying anything at all, but my conscience, it's killing me." "Liam, what is it?" Elara urged, her anxiety spiking. "You're scaring me." He took a deep breath. "About the ceremony," he said, his gaze finally meeting hers, filled with a mixture of guilt and apology. It wasn't just an act. Not entirely." Elara frowned. "What do you mean?" "Of course it was an act. You're an actor. Kael hired you." "Yes, initially," Liam interrupted, his words tumbling out now. But then, Kael's family, specifically Beatrice and Mrs. Blackwood, Aunt Maeve, they approached me last week. He swallowed hard. They had their suspicions about the original arrangement, I think. Or maybe they just saw something between you and Kael, something real, during all the preparations. They didn't say exactly how much they knew, just that they wanted to ensure Kael's happiness was genuine and lasting. Elara felt a chill creep over her. What did they ask you to do, Liam? He looked down, then back up, his face pale. They asked me if I would be willing to become legally ordained online. Quickly. They said it was just a precaution, a way to bless the union in every possible sense, especially for Aunt Maeve's peace of mind, given her health. They said they saw how much you two cared for each other, despite whatever unconventional way you started. He took another shaky breath. So I did it, Elara. Last Tuesday. I'm a legally ordained minister with the Universal Life Church, online. It's official. Elara stared at Liam, the music from the reception hall fading to a dull, distant throb in her ears. His words hung in the air, heavy, unbelievable. Legally ordained? She echoed, her voice barely a whisper. What are you saying? Liam nodded miserably. The vows you took today, Elara, the ceremony I performed, with the marriage license Kael's legal team apparently had ready just in case, and that Beatrice had me sign right before the ceremony. It was all legally binding. He looked like he was about to be sick. I pronounced you husband and wife, and according to the state, you are. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Elara's feet. Her mind reeled, struggling to process the enormity of what he was saying. Husband and wife, not in a play, not as part of a charade for Aunt Maeve, but really, legally, bindingly. She thought of Kael, out there in the reception hall, probably still believing this was all an elaborate, albeit emotionally complicated performance that would end tomorrow. He had no idea. He'd agreed to one day for Aunt Maeve. He hadn't agreed to this. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She was married, truly, irrevocably married to Kaelin Blackwood, a man who, just a few weeks ago, was a stranger she'd agreed to deceive for money. A man who, despite those confusing sparks and that earth-shattering kiss, still thought their relationship was fundamentally a sham. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. The beautiful gown suddenly felt like a lead weight, the diamond lavalier a choking band around her neck. This wasn't a rom-com anymore. This was a full-blown, five-alarm catastrophe. What had the Blackwood family done? And what, in God's name, was she going to do now? She had to tell Kael. But how? When? The revelation Liam had just dropped was a bomb, and she was holding it, the fuse sputtering wildly. Her entire world had just been rewritten, without her consent, without Kael's, and the ink was indelible. Before Elara could form a coherent thought, before she could even begin to process the cataclysmic news Liam had delivered, the doors to the anteroom burst open, and Beatrice swept in, her face wreathed in smiles, Aunt Maeve beaming beside her in a wheelchair pushed by Arthur Jr. "There you are, darlings," Beatrice trilled, apparently oblivious to Elara's shell-shocked expression and Liam's guilty pallor. "We have one more little surprise for the happy couple." Kael appeared in the doorway behind them, a questioning look on his face. "Surprise?" Aunt Maeve clapped her frail hands together. "Your honeymoon, my dears. All arranged." Two liveried staff members then appeared, carrying smart, expensive-looking luggage. Another held up a pair of airline tickets in a glossy folder. "A private villa in Bali," Beatrice announced triumphantly. "Your flight leaves in 3 hours. Everything is packed. Your passports are with the tickets. Just a little something to help you unwind after all the excitement." Elara stared, dumbfounded. Bali? 3 hours? Her mind was still trying to grapple with legally married, and now they were being shanghaied on a tropical honeymoon. This was insane. Absolutely, certifiably insane. Kael looked as surprised as Elara felt, though his reaction was more one of weary resignation than outright panic. "Bali? Mother, Aunt Maeve, that's incredibly generous, but really—" "Nonsense, darling," Aunt Maeve insisted, her eyes sparkling. "You both deserve it. All that lovely bonding time. Go on, go on. Shoo, lovebirds." Elara tried to speak, to protest, to scream, "I think I'm actually legally his wife and he doesn't know." But no words came out. Her throat was too tight. All she could do was stare helplessly at Kael, whose gaze met hers with a mixture of bewildered apology and shared entrapment. And just like that, amidst a flurry of well-wishes, congratulatory hugs, and the Blackwood family's unstoppable, well-intentioned steamrolling, Elara, still reeling from the revelation that she was Kael Blackwood's actual legal wife, found herself being gently but firmly ushered towards a waiting limousine, Kael beside her, their pre-packed honeymoon luggage already stowed in the trunk. The charade had taken on a terrifying new reality, and she was being whisked halfway across the world with a husband who was still blissfully in the dark. The limousine sped towards the private airfield, a blur of city lights streaking past the tinted windows. Elara sat beside Kael, the weight of Liam's confession a lead ball in her stomach. She had to tell him, now, before this insane honeymoon became an even bigger, more complicated lie. "Kael," she began, her voice barely a tremor, "about the ceremony, Liam said something—" "Incredible, wasn't it?" Kael interrupted, a rare, almost boyish grin on his face. He looked energized, relieved. Aunt Maeve was ecstatic. Even my brother cracked a smile. "I think we actually pulled it off, Elara. Operation Save Aunt Maeve's Sanity was a resounding success." He chuckled, then turned to his phone, already tapping away. "Just need to confirm the Jets manifest with Peterson, and then we can finally relax. Bali, can you believe it?" Elara stared at him, her carefully rehearsed opening dissolving. He was so oblivious, so focused on the performance and the logistics. He hadn't a clue. "Kael, it's more than that," she tried again, a note of desperation creeping in. "Liam told me something about the legality, about him being ordained." Kael waved a dismissive hand, still focused on his phone. "Oh, Liam always was a bit of a dramatic actor. Probably just caught up in the moment. Don't worry about it, Vance. The important thing is, it looked convincing, Aunt Maeve is happy, and Seraphina's little stunt was handled." He finally looked at her, his smile softening with something that might have been gratitude, or perhaps just relief that their ordeal was seemingly over. "You were brilliant, by the way. A true professional." A professional liar, she thought, a cold wave of despair washing over her. He wasn't listening. He didn't want to listen. Because of that, because he was so wrapped up in the successful completion of their charade, her bombshell was trapped, a ticking clock inside her chest. Each mile closer to the airport, each second that passed, made the inevitable explosion feel that much more catastrophic. She didn't know what scared her more, telling him or not telling him. Bali was paradise, a private villa nestled in lush greenery, an infinity pool overlooking a turquoise ocean, the air thick with the scent of frangipani. It was the stuff of dreams, or it would have been if Elara hadn't felt like she was walking through a nightmare. Kael, seemingly still on a high from successfully navigating the family drama, was surprisingly relaxed. He surveyed the opulent villa with an air of detached approval. "Not bad," he commented, tossing his jacket onto a plush sofa. "They certainly didn't skimp." A villa attendant, all smiles and quiet efficiency, showed them the master suite. It was enormous, with a king-sized bed draped in white linen and panoramic ocean views. For a horrifying moment, Elara thought. But then Kael turned to the attendant. "Actually, could you show my wife?" He said the word with a slight, almost imperceptible hesitation that still lanced Elara's heart. "To her suite? I believe we requested separate accommodations." He then gave Elara a perfectly pleasant, almost businesslike smile. Unless you'd prefer this one, of course. I'm easy. Separate accommodations. The words so casually delivered were like a slap in the face. He still thought this was all just an act, a performance that had reached its conclusion. He was ready to revert to their original, detached arrangement, now that Aunt Maeve was satisfied, and they were thousands of miles away from his family. The chasm between his perception of their fake marriage and her dawning, terrifying reality of a real one yawned before her, vast and unbridgeable. He had no idea, not a clue, and his nonchalance, his easy assumption that they would simply occupy different wings of this honeymoon villa, was more painful than any anger he could have shown. It meant that kiss at the altar, those surprisingly heartfelt vows, the moments of connection they'd shared, they meant nothing to him beyond the performance, or so it seemed. Elara just stared at him, her throat too tight to speak, the beautiful Balinese sunset mocking her with its splendor. He was offering her a choice of gilded cages, and all she felt was trapped. That night, after a silent, excruciatingly awkward dinner where Kael mostly discussed business calls he needed to make, and Elara mostly pushed food around her plate, she couldn't bear it any longer. He was in his separate suite, probably assuming she was settling into hers, but she couldn't. Not with this monstrous secret burning a hole through her. She found him on his balcony, staring out at the moonlit ocean, a glass of something amber in his hand. He looked surprised to see her. "Elara? Everything all right? Your suite not up to par?" "Kael," she said, her voice trembling. "We need to talk. For real this time, and you need to listen." Something in her tone, a desperate urgency, finally seemed to cut through his detached composure. He turned fully to face her, his expression wary. "What is it?" She took a deep, shaky breath. Liam told me something, after the reception." She watched his face, saw the flicker of impatience, the assumption that this was more wedding minutiae. He said your family, Beatrice and Aunt Maeve, they asked him to get legally ordained online before the ceremony." Kael frowned. "Ordained? Why would they?" "Because they wanted it to be real, Kael." The words burst out of her, raw and anguished. "Because they signed a marriage license. Because the vows we took, the ceremony Liam performed, it was all legally binding." Her voice cracked. "We're not just fake married, Kael. We are actually, legally, husband and wife." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant crash of waves. Kael stared at her, his face slowly draining of color. Disbelief warred with a dawning, horrified understanding. And then, the dam broke. "What?" His voice was a strangled whisper. Then it rose, gathering force like a tsunami. "Legally married? Are you telling me my family... You went through with a legally binding marriage without my full, informed consent?" His eyes, moments before calm, now blazed with a terrifying, incandescent fury. "They manipulated me. And you stood there, you said those vows, knowing this?" "No! I didn't know until Liam told me after the reception," Elara cried, shrinking back from the sheer force of his rage. "I tried to tell you in the car, but you wouldn't listen." "Wouldn't listen?" He advanced on her, his face a mask of betrayal and fury. "You think this is some kind of joke, Elara? My life, my future, dictated by my sentimental aunt and a hired actress who suddenly finds herself with a legal claim?" The accusation in his voice was a physical blow. He felt betrayed, manipulated, his autonomy stripped away. "This isn't a game. This is my life you've all been playing with." His anger was a palpable force, pushing her back, making her tremble. The beautiful Balinese night, the scent of flowers, the romantic setting, it all dissolved into the terrifying inferno of his rage. Kael paced the length of the balcony like a caged tiger, his movements sharp, violent with suppressed rage. "I cannot believe this. My own family, conspiring to trap me, and you, Elara, you just let it happen. You didn't think to mention this tiny little detail, that we are legally bound, before we got on a plane to the other side of the world for a sham honeymoon?" "I tried, Kael. I swear I tried," Elara choked out, tears streaming down her face now. "You were so focused on everything being a success, you brushed me off, and then your family whisked us away before I could even process it." "Process it?" He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that held no humor. "There's nothing to process, Elara. This is a disaster, a monumental, legally entangled disaster." He stopped pacing, his eyes fixing on her with a cold, hard fury that was more terrifying than his shouting. "This marriage," he spat the word, "is a fraud. It was based on lies, manipulation, and apparently the utter delusion of my entire family." He grabbed his phone, already dialing. "I'm calling Peterson. I need the jet ready. I'm going back. Tonight." Elara stared at him, her heart shattering into a million pieces. "Going back? What about me?" Her voice was small, lost. Kael didn't even look at her. His attention was solely on the phone call, his voice clipped and furious as he barked instructions. "I have to deal with my family," he said, finally glancing at her, his eyes like chips of obsidian. "I have to undo this mess. You stay here. Enjoy Bali. Send me the bill." The callousness of it, the casual dismissal, was devastating. And then, without another word, without a backward glance, Kael Blackwood turned and strode out of the suite, his footsteps echoing on the polished stone floors. Moments later, Elara heard the distinct sound of a door slamming shut, a sound that reverberated through the opulent villa, a sound that echoed the utter desolation in her heart. She was alone. Abandoned in paradise, legally married to a man who now clearly despised her, a man who saw her as nothing more than a conspirator in his family's betrayal. The warm, fragrant Balinese air suddenly felt cold, suffocating. The dream had become a nightmare of epic proportions, and she had no idea how to wake up. Kael stormed into the familiar, opulent drawing room of his childhood home, a place that had always felt more like a museum than a refuge. His father, Arthur Blackwood Sr., a man whose stern demeanor rarely softened, looked up from his newspaper, surprised by Kael's unannounced and clearly furious arrival. Beatrice, his stepmother, was arranging flowers nearby, and her hands stilled, her expression immediately concerned. "Kaelin, what on earth—" Beatrice began, but Kael cut her off, his voice tight with rage. "Don't Kaelin me," he bit out, his gaze fixed on his father, then shifting to include Beatrice. "I just flew back from Bali, alone. Do either of you have any idea what you've done?" Arthur Sr. slowly lowered his paper, his eyes narrowing. "I assume this is about your new wife?" "My new wife?" Kael laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You mean the actress you all conspired to legally bind me to without my knowledge or consent? The woman who is currently stranded in Bali because I found out my entire family, the people I'm supposed to trust, orchestrated the most manipulative, underhanded scheme imaginable?" His voice rose with each accusation. "You didn't just meddle, you hijacked my life. You turned a difficult situation into an absolute, legally binding farce." Beatrice stepped forward, her face pale. "Kaelin, we only wanted your happiness. We saw how Elara—" "You saw nothing!" Kael roared, his control snapping. "You saw what you wanted to see. You saw a solution to your Kaelin needs to settle down project. Did it ever occur to you to ask me, to respect my autonomy, my decisions?" He turned back to his father. "This is your doing, isn't it? Always pulling the strings, always thinking you know best." Arthur Sr. finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. "I did what I thought was necessary to secure your future, Kaelin, with a woman who, despite the unconventional circumstances, clearly has a profound effect on you." "A profound effect?" Kael scoffed. "She thinks I despise her. I left her on the other side of the world because I felt so utterly betrayed by everyone, including her apparent complicity." The raw pain in his voice was undeniable, even through the anger. This wasn't just about the manipulation. It was about the tangled mess of feelings Elara had stirred in him, now poisoned by this revelation. He felt like a fool, played by everyone he held dear. Days later, Elara unlocked the door to her small, familiar apartment, the scent of stale coffee and old takeout, a stark, depressing contrast to the fragrant air of Bali. She felt hollowed out, exhausted beyond tears. The flight back had been a blur of misery and recriminations. What a fool she'd been. She'd barely dropped her bag when a key turned in the lock, and her roommate, Chloe, burst in, followed, to Elara's utter shock, by Beatrice Blackwood. "Elara! Oh, thank God!" Chloe rushed to hug her. "We've been so worried. When Kael came back alone, ranting about, well, everything." Beatrice stepped forward, her expression a mixture of apology and gentle concern. "Elara, my dear, I am so profoundly sorry for the distress our actions have caused. We truly misjudged how Kaelin would react to the legal aspect." Elara just stared at her, too weary to be angry anymore. "Why, Beatrice? Why would you do it?" "Because we saw it, Elara," Beatrice said softly, her eyes sincere. "From the very beginning, even when you were both trying so hard to pretend otherwise, we saw the connection between you and Kaelin, the way he looked at you when he thought no one was watching, the way you made him laugh, truly laugh, for the first time in years." She took Elara's hand. "Yes, the initial arrangement was a shock when we pieced it together after Serafina's visit and Kael's confession, but we also saw something genuine blossoming. We hoped, that a little nudge, ensuring the wedding was real, would help you both overcome whatever obstacles you perceived." Chloe nodded eagerly. "Everyone saw it, Elara. Even the caterers were taking bets on when he'd actually propose for real before the fake wedding. You two are so ridiculously blind when it comes to each other." Beatrice squeezed her hand. "Kaelin is stubborn and proud, and right now he's deeply hurt because he feels manipulated. But Elara, what he feels for you, it's real. I know it is." She paused. "You need to tell him how you feel, dear. Truly tell him, before he lets his pride destroy any chance you both have." Elara looked at their earnest faces, a tiny, reluctant flicker of something that might have been hope stirring amidst the wreckage of her heart. Could they be right? Or was this just more well-intentioned meddling? Kael sat in his sterile, minimalist apartment, staring blankly at financial reports that usually captivated him. His anger at his family had cooled, leaving behind a bitter, empty ache. He'd successfully initiated annulment proceedings, or so his lawyers assured him, but the victory felt hollow. A knock on the door. He ignored it. It came again, more insistent. With a sigh of irritation, he yanked it open to find his father, Arthur Sr., standing there, an uncharacteristically subdued expression on his face. "Can we talk, Kaelin?" Arthur asked, not waiting for an invitation as he stepped inside. Kael gestured curtly toward a chair. "If you're here to apologize for turning my life into a soap opera, you can save your breath." Arthur sat, his gaze steady. "I'm not here to apologize for wanting your happiness, son, though I will concede, perhaps my methods were heavy-handed." He paused. "I saw a light in you when you were with that girl, Elara. A light I haven't seen since before your mother passed. You were less guarded, more present. You even laughed, properly." Kael scoffed. "It was an act, Father. A very expensive, very complicated act." "Was it?" Arthur challenged, his voice quiet but firm. "All of it? That kiss at the rehearsal? The way you looked at her during your vows, even after that disastrous interruption? The way you defended her against Serafina and her own mother without a second thought?" He leaned forward. "I know you feel manipulated. And perhaps you were. But don't let your anger at us, at the situation, blind you to what you truly feel for the girl herself." Kael looked away, a muscle working in his jaw. His father's words were hitting uncomfortably close to a truth he didn't want to examine. "I pushed you, Kaelin, because I saw you stuck. Stuck in your work, stuck in your cynicism, stuck in a loneliness you refused to acknowledge." Arthur's voice softened. "I wanted you to have what your mother and I had, a partnership. Joy, love. Elara, for all her unconventional entry into our lives, she offered you a glimpse of that, didn't she?" He stood up. "Think about it, Kaelin. Truly think. Is this anger worth sacrificing a chance at genuine happiness, however unexpectedly it arrived?" With that, his father left, leaving Kael alone with his thoughts and a growing uncomfortable suspicion that Arthur Blackwood Sr., for once, might actually be right. In the days that followed his father's visit, Kael tried to immerse himself back into his work, into the familiar, ordered world of Blackwood Corporation. He chaired meetings, analyzed spreadsheets, made billion-dollar decisions. But for the first time in his life, it all felt flat, meaningless. His sprawling penthouse apartment, once a symbol of his success and independence, now echoed with an unbearable emptiness. He found himself wandering through the silent rooms, the silence amplifying the hollowness in his chest. He'd catch himself expecting to hear Elara's slightly off-key humming as she made tea, or the sound of her infectious laughter at some ridiculous reality show she insisted on watching. He remembered the way she'd wrinkle her nose when she was concentrating, the surprisingly sharp wit that lay beneath her sometimes ditzy exterior, the passionate way she spoke about her absurd acting dreams. He remembered the vulnerability in her eyes during their late-night talks, the unexpected comfort of her presence. He even missed her disastrous attempts at domesticity, like the time she'd tried to make him healthy muffins that tasted like sweetened cardboard, but had made him laugh until his sides ached. He missed arguing with her, challenging her, and being challenged by her in return. She was infuriating, unpredictable, and utterly Elara. And then there was the memory of her during the wedding ceremony, after her mother's cruel outburst. The raw fear in her eyes, quickly followed by a steely resolve as he'd stepped in. And her vows, so heartfelt, so clearly improvised, so full of a confusing, messy honesty that had blindsided him. She'd promised to be brave with him. He realized with a jolt that was both terrifying and exhilarating that his father was right. His anger at the manipulation, at the deception, was real. But beneath it, deeper and far more potent, was something else. A profound, undeniable connection to Elara Vance. A connection he had ruthlessly severed in his rage. His life, which he'd always believed was full and self-sufficient, now felt barren without her. Without her chaos, her light, her unexpected, exasperating, and increasingly essential presence. He missed her. God, how he missed her. And just like that, everything changed inside him. The annulment papers sitting on his desk suddenly felt like the biggest mistake of his life. The rain was a relentless curtain, mirroring the storm that had been raging in Kael's soul for days. He stood before Elara's worn apartment building, clutching the annulment papers like a shield he desperately wanted to throw down. His epiphany, the stark, undeniable truth that his life was a barren landscape without her, had driven him through the downpour, a man possessed. He had to see her. He had to know. He found Elara looking out her window, a silhouette against the rain-streaked glass, looking as lost and fragile as he felt. When she turned and saw him, soaked to the bone, her eyes widened in disbelief. "Kael?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the drumming rain. "What are you doing here?" He stepped inside, dripping onto her worn rug, the annulment papers clutched in his hand. I had to talk to you, Elara." His voice was hoarse, raw with emotion. "I've been a fool, a blind, arrogant fool." He gestured with the papers, the official-looking documents a stark symbol of his earlier furious rejection. These are for the annulment. My lawyers drew them up." Elara's face, which had held a flicker of something unreadable, hope, fear, closed off, a familiar guardedness falling over her features. "Oh, right, of course." "No," Kael said quickly, stepping closer, his gaze imploring. "That's not why I'm here. Not really." The rain outside seemed to intensify, cocooning them in a world of their own. "Elara, since I left Bali, since I left you, everything has felt wrong. Empty." He took a ragged breath, the words he'd rehearsed 100 times feeling inadequate. "I know I hurt you. I was angry. I felt betrayed by my family, and I lashed out. But my anger, it blinded me to what was right in front of me." He looked directly into her eyes, his own filled with a desperate sincerity. "I miss you, Elara. I miss your laughter, your ridiculous optimism, even your terrible attempts at sabotage." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "My life is better with you in it. Messier, crazier, but undeniably better." He held up the papers. "I came to ask you, Elara, do you truly want to sign these? Do you want to end us?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken hopes and fears, the sound of the rain a dramatic underscore to the most important question he'd ever asked. Elara stared at Kael, his words washing over her, more potent than the storm raging outside. Her heart, which she'd tried so hard to shield, to numb against further pain, hammered against her ribs, a wild, hopeful bird beating its wings against a cage. He missed her. He actually missed her. The annulment papers in his hand seemed to mock them, a legal document trying to erase something that felt so overwhelmingly, confusingly real. Her mind replayed their journey, the absurd beginning, the escalating charade, the unexpected moments of connection, the vulnerability shared in hushed late-night conversations, that earth-shattering kiss at the altar, and then his rage, his abandonment. Could she trust this? This sudden, rain-soaked confession? "Kael," she began, her voice trembling, I don't know what to say." He stepped closer still, the scent of rain and his familiar intoxicating scent filling her senses. "Just tell me the truth, Elara. For once, between us, just the unvarnished truth. Do you want this marriage, this crazy, accidental, legally binding marriage, to be over?" His eyes searched hers, pleading for an answer she was terrified to give. Because if she said no, if she admitted what her heart was screaming, what then? The silence stretched, filled only by their ragged breaths and the relentless rain. She saw the vulnerability in his gaze, the fear mirroring her own. And in that moment, all the hurt, all the anger, all the confusion seemed to coalesce into one undeniable certainty. "No," she whispered, the word so soft he might have missed it if he hadn't been watching her so intently. "No, Kael. I don't want to end it." A wave of relief so profound it was almost a physical blow washed over Kael's face. His shoulders sagged, the tension draining out of him. And then, a slow, dazzling smile spread across his lips, a smile that reached his eyes and made them blaze with a light Elara had only glimpsed before. Without another word, Kael Blackwood took the annulment papers, the symbol of their potential end, and with a decisive, almost savage satisfaction, he ripped them in half, and then in half again, letting the pieces flutter to the floor like discarded confetti. "Good," he breathed, his gaze never leaving hers. "Because, Elara Vance, despite every ridiculous, insane, and infuriating thing we've been through, I think I've fallen in love with you." He took her hands, his grip warm and sure. "I love you, and I want to stay married to you. For real. If you'll have me." Elara's breath hitched. You love me?" she asked, the words a fragile whisper, tears welling in her eyes, blurring his beloved rain-streaked face. "More than I ever thought possible," Kael affirmed, his voice thick with emotion. He gently brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I was just too stubborn, too blind, too afraid to see it until I thought I'd lost you." And then, all the remaining walls around Elara's heart crumbled. "Oh, Kael," she choked out, a sob escaping her. "I love you too. I think I have for a while now, even when I was furious with you, even when I was terrified." His smile widened, and then he was closing the distance between them, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her close. And he kissed her. It wasn't like the hesitant, questioning kiss at the altar or the desperate, surprising one at the rehearsal. This kiss was a declaration, a promise, a celebration. It was fierce and tender, passionate and yielding, a torrent of all the unspoken emotions that had been raging between them for weeks. The rain still hammered against the windows, but inside Elara's small apartment, their own storm had finally broken, leaving behind a breathtaking, beautiful calm. She clung to him, her fingers tangling in his damp hair, kissing him back with all the pent-up longing, all the fear, all the love that had been bottled up inside her. It was a kiss that tasted of rain and forgiveness and second chances. A kiss that washed away the lies, the deceptions, the misunderstandings, leaving only the raw, undeniable truth of their connection. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and dazed, they just held each other, foreheads resting together, the sound of their intertwined breathing a counterpoint to the fading storm outside. The charade was over. The performance had ended, and what was left, standing there in the middle of Elara's humble apartment, was something wonderfully, astonishingly real, a genuine beginning forged in the most unexpected of ways. Kael looked down at her, his eyes filled with a love so profound it stole her breath all over again. This was it. Their true story was just starting. 6 months later, the San Francisco fog rolled gently past the large bay windows of Kael and Elara's new home, a charming Victorian, worlds away from the stark minimalism of Kael's former penthouse. Laughter, warm and genuine, echoed through the rooms. Elara's acting career had taken an unexpected, delightful turn. A quirky web series she'd created with Chloe had gone viral, and she was now fielding offers from actual, paying producers. She was funny, she was authentic, and audiences adored her. Kael, too, had found a new rhythm. He still helmed Blackwood Corporation, but his focus had shifted. He'd taken a genuine interest in the Arts Foundation his mother had started, and several of her vibrant, abstract paintings now adorned their walls, a splash of joyful color in their shared life. He smiled more, laughed easier, the guarded CEO gradually giving way to the warm, loving husband Elara adored. They were gathered around a crackling fireplace for a Blackwood family Christmas, the earlier tensions and manipulations forgiven, if not entirely forgotten, replaced by a genuine, if occasionally chaotic, affection. Aunt Maeve, looking remarkably well, her doctors citing unprecedented improvement due to sheer happiness, was knitting something tiny and blue. Beatrice was bustling, ensuring everyone had enough eggnog. Arthur Sr. was even engaged in an animated, if slightly bewildered, conversation with Chloe about the nuances of viral marketing. Kael slipped an arm around Elara, pulling her close, his hand resting possessively on her gently rounded belly. They shared a secret, joyful smile. "Everyone," Kael announced, his voice filled with a quiet pride that made Elara's heart swell. "Elara and I have some news." He paused, his gaze sweeping over his expectant family. "We're expecting." A chorus of delighted exclamations filled the room. Aunt Maeve burst into happy tears. Beatrice hugged them both tightly, and then Kael's cousin, Lyra, who had recently married Arthur Jr., stood up, a shy, happy blush on her cheeks. "Well," she said, her hand protectively on her own stomach, "it seems great minds think alike. We have some news, too." The joy in the room doubled, a beautiful, heartwarming echo of new life and new beginnings. Elara leaned her head on Kael's shoulder, watching the happy scene, her heart overflowing. Their journey had started with a lie, a desperate act, a series of misadventures, but somehow, against all odds, They had found their truth, their love, and now their own family. The future stretched before them, bright and full of promise, a genuine beginning indeed,